To the bikers who rolled into town, he was just another helpless old man, a prop for their show of strength. They never imagined his one phone call would bring a different kind of army to Sierra Bluffs. Dawn in the desert was not a moment, but a slow, deliberate ritual. The sun, a master painter, first traced the jagged spine of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in fire, then spilled its molten light across the vast, empty plateaus of New Mexico. Finally, it touched the town of Sierra Bluffs, a handful of sun-bleached buildings huddled together as if for protection against the immense, indifferent sky. The air carried the fine red dust of centuries, and silence was the town's true native. A silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant, lonely cry of a hawk. Here, time didn't stop. It simply waited. And on this particular morning, it was waiting for two things. An old man named Arthur Art Callahan taking his usual seat outside the Desert Rose diner, and the distant, growing rumble of motorcycles carrying the men who would shatter his peace forever. On the porch of a modest, impeccably kept adobe house at the end of a quiet street, Arthur Art Callahan presided over this daily renaissance. At 78, his body was a detailed map of a life fully lived. His hands, resting on the knees of his worn denim jeans, were gnarled, a network of veins and faded liver spots. Yet their grip, even in repose, still hinted at the latent strength that had once wrestled with the stubborn controls of a UH-1 Huey helicopter in the turbulent, fire-streaked skies of Vietnam. His face was a landscape of wrinkles, each one a story. Some of laughter with his late wife Eleanor, some of sorrow for lost friends, and many of the quiet, daily perseverance that defines a long life. His calm, ocean-blue eyes, set deep under brows still thick and white, scanned the horizon with a familiar, practiced ease. Those eyes had once scanned endless green canopies for signs of enemy movement and safe landing zones. Now they checked the sky for the promise of rain or the flight patterns of birds. His morning ritual was as precise and unvarying as the desert sunrise. He rose at 5:30 a.m., his joints issuing a soft symphony of protests and creaks that rivaled the sound of his porch rocker. He performed a series of gentle, deliberate stretches, a ghost of the rigorous calisthenics mandated by the Air Force, now adapted for a body that had endured 8 decades of gravity and grace. He shaved with a straight razor, its blade a familiar, sharp companion, its steady scrape a small, daily victory over time's entropy. Dressed in his uniform of faded plaid shirt and denim, he guided his 1978 Ford F-150, a relic polished to a deep, respectful maroon shine, into the gravel lot of Rosie's diner. Rosie's was the unchanging, greasy spoon heart of Sierra Bluffs for 3 generations. The bell above the door announced his arrival with a familiar, tinny jingle. "Mornin', Mr. Callahan," said Maria, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a weary smile. She was the granddaughter of the diner's founder, and she carried the weight of its legacy with a resilient pride. "The usual?" "Coffee, black, and 2 eggs over easy, Maria." "Thank you, dear," Art replied, his voice a low, steady rumble, like stones tumbling in a deep river. He settled into his usual booth by the window, the red vinyl seat worn smooth and pale in the specific shape of his body, a testament to decades of quiet contemplation. He unfolded the Sierra Bluffs Sentinel, its pages filled with the gentle, predictable news of bake sales, high school football, and county commission meetings. The slow, steady rhythm of the town pulsed around him, the sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the low murmur of the few other early risers, the hum of the ancient refrigerator. This peace, this predictable tranquility, was what he had fought for. It was a silence he had earned, a stark and beautiful contrast to the deafening roar of rotor blades, the static crackle of radio traffic, and the scream of metal under fire. The peace was not so much broken as it was systematically annihilated, just after 8:00 a.m. It began as a distant, dissonant buzz, an irritant on the very edge of hearing, like a fly trapped in a far-off room. Then it grew, not in volume at first, but in malevolent intent, coalescing into a chaotic, aggressive snarl that tore at the fabric of the morning calm. It wasn't the friendly, familiar rumble of a local's Harley. It was a sound of pure, undiluted menace, a discordant symphony of poorly tuned engines, straight pipes, and reckless, angry intent. First a dozen, then 24 motorcycles swarmed into the lot and onto the main street, kicking up a thick, choking cloud of dust that blotted out the clean morning light. Chrome gleamed not with warmth, but with a cold, predatory menace, reflecting distorted images of the frightened town. The iron jackals had arrived, and they were hungry for something Sierra Bluffs had in abundance: easy submission. Art did not look up from his newspaper, but a subtle shift occurred within him. Every sense, sight, sound, smell, was immediately, acutely dialed to a higher frequency. Assess, orient, decide, act. The old OODA loop, drilled into him a lifetime ago in the briefing rooms of Southeast Asia, clicked into place as effortlessly as breathing. His heartbeat, instead of racing, seemed to slow and deepen, settling into the calm, measured rhythm he'd found at treetop level, with tracer fire stitching green lines past his canopy. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee, the bitter heat a familiar anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. The leader, a man who called himself Jax, swung off his bike with a practiced, theatrical swagger. He was all coiled, tattooed muscle and cheap menace, his leather vest a patchwork of crudely stitched symbols celebrating chaos, nihilism, and a profound, unspoken insecurity. His eyes, as he scanned the diner's interior, were cold and flat, a shark's eyes, devoid of empathy or higher thought, assessing the occupants not as people, but as potential prey. "Well, well, look what we got here." Jax's voice cut through the quiet, loud and performative, meant for an audience of both his gang and the terrified town. He sauntered in, his heavy boots crunching on the worn linoleum. "The whole damn town's still asleep. You need help finding your way back to the retirement home, old-timer? Maybe we should call your nurse." A few of his followers, clustered near the door, chuckled on cue, a hollow, nervous sound. Art lowered his paper, folding it with a slow, deliberate care that was itself a form of defiance. He met Jax's gaze, his own eyes holding not fear, but a deep, unsettling stillness. "I'm just having my breakfast, son," he replied, his voice not rising above its calm, measured tone. "You're welcome to do the same. The food's good. The coffee's hot. No need for all the commotion." One of the gang members, a wiry, twitchy man with a serpent tattoo coiling up his neck, slithered in behind Jax. His name was Vance. His eyes, sharp with a rodent-like malice, darted around the room, taking inventory of the fear, before they caught on a small, discreet pin on Art's collar, just above his heart. It was a simple, burnished silver emblem of the 1st Cavalry Division. "Hey, Jax, check it out," Vance sneered, pointing a dirty finger. "The old guy's got a souvenir. Thinks he's a war hero. Probably picked it up at a garage sale or stole it from a real soldier." Jax's smirk widened as he strode over, his presence looming over the table, invading Art's personal space with the stench of stale beer, gasoline, and cheap cologne. He leaned down, his face inches from Art's. A war hero? What was that, Vietnam? Did you hide in the jungle while the real men fought? Or maybe you just polished the boots of the guys who did? His breath was hot and sour. The words were meant to demean, to reduce a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and unspeakable horror to a pathetic punchline. But they landed on a spirit that had been tempered in the crucible of war, a soul annealed in the fires of Khe Sanh, Da Nang, and 100 unmarked landing zones. Art had held the bleeding, mangled bodies of young soldiers, boys barely old enough to shave, whispering empty promises of survival as their lives seeped through his fingers onto the Huey's deck. He had felt his aircraft shudder violently as small arms fire tore through its thin skin. He had navigated by instinct and prayer through monsoons and thick fog to get his wounded cargo to safety. This posturing, this pathetic pantomime of power, was an insult to the very concept of struggle. "I did my duty," Art said simply, his gaze never leaving Jax's, unwavering and clear. Jax's smirk tightened, its edges becoming brittle. "Duty? Let me tell you about duty, old man. My duty is to my crew. And this town," he gestured vaguely around him, "is our territory now. Your kind, your whole greatest generation bullshit, it's over. You're a museum piece." He snapped his fingers sharply. "A dusty exhibit." The other jackals, emboldened, began to fan out, some slamming into booths, others leaning aggressively against the counter, their collective presence a palpable, choking threat. Maria had retreated behind the counter, her face pale, her hand hovering near the phone. Art knew she was calling the sheriff, but in a county this vast, Deputy Sims was likely 20 minutes away. "You should finish up and crawl back to your rocking chair," Jax continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for Art. "Sierra Bluffs belongs to the Jackals now. You understand? We decide who opens their doors, who pays for protection, what happens here. We are the law now." Art carefully placed his folded newspaper neatly beside his plate, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. The action was slow, precise, a study in controlled motion amidst chaos. "Young man," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority that seemed to suck the sound from the room and made several of the lounging jackals shift uneasily. "I've faced down enemies who possessed more genuine menace in their little finger than you and your friends have in your entire collective being. Enemies who would have considered you an amusing distraction before they erased you. I suggest you take your toys and leave this town in peace. Leave now, before you learn a lesson you're fundamentally not equipped to handle." He moved to slide out of the booth, a statement of finality, but Vance, reacting to a perceived threat to Jax's authority, slammed his hand down on the table with a sudden, explosive force. The coffee cup jumped, sloshing dark liquid across the formica. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence. Jax leaned in, his face now a contorted mask of rage. The facade of cool control was cracking, revealing the wounded, insecure boy beneath. "I don't think you heard me. I said, this is our town, and you will show some respect." "Respect," Art said, his voice still impossibly, terrifyingly steady, "is earned. It's not seized through fear and cheap theatrics. And from where I'm sitting, all I see are frightened boys, desperately pretending to be men, trying to feel big by pushing around someone who has forgotten more about courage than you will ever know." The insult, delivered not with a shout, but with the chilling clarity of a Supreme Court verdict, hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. For a heartbeat, the diner was utterly silent, frozen in a tableau of impending violence. Then Jax's face purpled with pure, unadulterated rage. His pride, a fragile and monstrous thing, had been publicly flayed. His hand shot out and grabbed Art's thin wrist, his grip like a vice, the bones grinding together painfully. "You think you can talk to me like that? You pathetic, wrinkled old—" As the pain shot up his arm, Art's mind didn't flash to fear, but to a specific, crystalline memory. A memory from a hot, humid day near the Laotian border. A medevac call for a squad caught in an ambush. His Huey, Eleanor's Grace, had dropped into a hot LZ, the ground exploding with puffs of dirt and the deadly chatter of automatic weapons fire. As they loaded the last wounded soldier, a sharp crack echoed through the cabin, and his crew chief, a tough, funny kid from Chicago named Frankie the Rock Rossetti, had cried out, stumbling back with a shard of red-hot shrapnel buried in his shoulder. Art, holding the cyclic stick with one hand, had reached back, his hand finding Frankie's, their eyes meeting for a split second in the chaotic, noisy hell. "Rossetti! You hang on! We're all getting home! That's an order!" He'd then poured on the power, flying a desperate, evasive pattern through the valleys, the door gunners returning fire, until the green hell receded behind them and the relative safety of the base appeared on the horizon. Frankie Rossetti had never forgotten that moment, that promise, that bond. He had not only survived, he had thrived, building one of the most respected private security and logistics firms on the West Coast. And, more importantly, he was the founding president and spiritual leader of the Guardian Angels, a nationwide motorcycle club composed entirely of honorably discharged veterans, a network of brothers bound by a code of honor, not criminality. His private number was saved in the contacts of Art's modern smartphone, a digital promise from a man now in his robust early 70s, given to him years ago with a single, solemn instruction. "You got me home, Chief. That's a debt that doesn't expire. You call, we come. No questions asked, no matter what." For over 50 years, through the birth of his children, the peaceful death of his beloved Eleanor, through quiet triumphs and private sorrows, that promise had gone unclaimed, a secret talisman of a past life. But as he looked into Jax's eyes and saw not just anger, but a profound, soul-deep disrespect for everything he held sacred, for duty, for sacrifice, for the quiet dignity of a life lived well, Art knew the time for relics had passed. The time for action had returned. "Take your hand off me," Art said, his voice dropping to a tone of absolute, glacial command that brooked no argument. It was the voice he had used to command his crew through hell, the voice that cut through the radio static and the panic to bring them home. Jax, startled by the sudden, undeniable shift in the old man's demeanor, the transition from placid elder to something else entirely, something formidable and ancient, loosened his grip for a fraction of a second. It was all Art needed. With a surprising, wiry strength born of a lifetime of labor and resilience, he pulled his arm back. "You're making a mistake," Art said, his voice low and deadly serious. He reached slowly, deliberately, into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The device looked incongruous in his gnarled hand, a symbol of a world he largely ignored, but now his most potent weapon. Jax laughed, a harsh, nervous sound that echoed in the silent diner. "What's this? Calling your nurse? Go ahead. Maybe she can change your diaper before we teach you some goddamn manners. I'm not calling a nurse, Art said, his thumb finding the contact list. Each press a deliberate, fateful action. He looked around at the gang members, his eyes sweeping over their suddenly uncertain faces. Do any of you know who the guardian angels are? The reaction was immediate and electric. The bravado in the room deflated like a punctured tire. Vance took a half step back, his serpent tattoo seeming to shrink against his skin. Another jackal near the door visibly paled, his swagger evaporating. The guardian angels were the stuff of legend in their world. They weren't rivals. They were something far more terrifying. They were a disciplined, organized force of veterans, men who had seen real combat and whose loyalty was to a code, not chaos. They ran legitimate businesses, provided security for major events, and were known to have friends in every level of law enforcement, from the local sheriff to the FBI. Crossing them wasn't just a gang war. It was a professional and social death sentence, and the dark whispers suggested that for those who threatened their own, the consequences could be far more permanent. What about them? Vance muttered, his voice losing its sharp, mocking edge, replaced by a tremor of genuine fear. Everything, Art replied. He put the phone to his ear. It rang once, twice. In the dead silence of the diner, the tinny sound was deafening. A deep, gravelly voice, weathered by years, cigars, and command, answered. Rossetti. Frankie, Art said, his eyes locked on Jack's, pinning him in place with the weight of the past. It's Art Callahan. Remember that hot LZ near the border? When you caught that piece of shrapnel and I told you we were all going home? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, a void filled with 50 years of memory. Then Frankie Rossetti's voice, usually so hard and commanding, cracked with a raw, undisguised emotion. Art? Chief Callahan? My God, sir. I remember. I remember the fire coming up from the trees. I remember the pain. And I remember you looking back at me. I remember your voice. I owe you everything. What's wrong? Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm at Rosie's diner in Sierra Bluffs, Art said calmly, as if giving a situation report. There's a group here called the Jackals. Their leader, a man named Jax, seems to believe that terrorizing old men and threatening a peaceful town is a sign of strength. He could use a lesson in what real strength looks like, the kind that doesn't need to scream. The change in Rossetti's tone was instantaneous, shifting from nostalgic warmth to the cold, hard, uninflected edge of a military commander assessing a hostile threat. The Jackals. I've heard of them. A pack of rabid dogs with no code, no honor. Are you safe right now, Chief? Are you in immediate danger? For the moment, Art said, his gaze still fixed on Jax, who was now looking less like a predator and more like a cornered animal sensing the approach of a far larger, more dangerous one. Give me your address. We're mobilizing now. It's a 3-hour ride, but we're coming. Do not engage. Just sit tight. Keep yourself safe. We'll be there before they know what hit them. The line went dead. Art placed the phone back on the table. The silence in the diner was now absolute, thick with a dread so palpable it was difficult to breathe. The jackals were no longer looking at a helpless old man. They were looking at the calm, implacable catalyst for their own annihilation. He had not raised his voice. He had not thrown a punch. Yet he had just summoned a storm from 3 hours away. Jax tried to bluster, to reclaim the narrative, but the fear was now a live wire in his eyes. dancing behind the crumbling bravado. "You're bluffing. That wasn't Frankie Rossetti. You're a crazy old man. You don't know anyone." "Stick around," Art said softly, almost kindly, as if advising a foolish child. "Find out." The Jackals didn't stick around. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by a primal urge to flee. They scrambled for the door, a herd of panicked animals, their earlier swagger replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. They kicked over chairs, stumbled over each other. Their world of faux invincibility shattered in an instant. Jax, his hands shaking, was the last to leave. He pointed a trembling finger at Art, who had calmly resumed his seat and picked up his coffee cup. "This isn't over. You hear me? You're a dead man. This isn't over." The threat hung empty and pathetic in the air they left behind, their bikes roaring to life in a discordant, desperate symphony as they peeled out of town. Art simply watched them go, the steam from his coffee rising in a thin plume. He took a slow sip. He knew this was only the beginning. Bullies, when cornered and humiliated, always returned when their wounded pride overrode their sense of self-preservation. But the paradigm had shifted irrevocably. The rules of the game had just been rewritten by a man who had written the book on survival against impossible odds. Sierra Bluffs was no longer undefended territory. It was a designated landing zone. The waiting began. Art calmly explained the full situation to a shaken Maria and the few other patrons. He then called Sheriff Miller directly. The sheriff, a decent and overworked man, arrived within 20 minutes, his face a mask of concern. He was relieved Art was unharmed, but deeply worried about the promised retaliation from both the Jackals and the impending arrival of the guardian angels. "Art, I can't have a vigilante war in my town," Sheriff Miller said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It won't be a war, Tom," Art replied, his voice steady. "It'll be a lesson. Frankie Rossetti isn't a vigilante. He's a businessman and a community leader with a very specific skill set. He and his men will de-escalate. They'll just be present. And when the Jackals inevitably do something stupid, as they will, your department will be here to make the arrests with overwhelming evidence and overwhelming force on your side." The sheriff sighed, knowing his 2 deputies were no match for 24 enraged bikers. Reluctantly, he agreed to a plan. They would increase patrols, but the primary strategy would be one of deterrence and capture, orchestrated by the angels. The new sound came exactly 3 hours and 15 minutes later. It didn't start as a faint hum, but as a deep rhythmic vibration in the very earth, a sensation felt through the soles of the feet before it was heard by the ears. It grew steadily, not in the chaotic, aggressive snarl of the Jackals, but into a deep, unified, earth-shaking thunder. It was the sound of immense, controlled power, of absolute discipline, of an army on the move. It came from the old state highway, a single rolling wave of purpose. It was the sound of 40, then 50 motorcycles riding in perfect staggered formation, a moving wall of polished chrome and matte black steel. The lead scout, a single rider on a sleek, modified Harley, appeared at the town limits. He stopped, planted his feet, and scanned the area with a professional, sweeping gaze, his head on a swivel. Then he raised a clenched fist, giving a hand signal, and the main column arrived. They were not a handful, not a dozen, but a seemingly endless column of men and machines, 2 and 3 abreast, riding with a precision that spoke of military training and countless miles together. They were men of all ages and backgrounds, grizzled Vietnam vets with long gray hair and beards, their faces etched with the memories of a different jungle. Clean-cut men in their 40s and 50s with the hard, focused eyes of Desert Storm and the Balkans. Younger men in their 30s, their bearing speaking of tours in the mountains of Afghanistan and the streets of Fallujah. Their faces were set in grim, determined lines. Their vests, or cuts, were adorned not with symbols of anarchy, but with American flags, unit patches, 1st Cavalry, 101st Airborne, 3rd Infantry, Marine Corps emblems, Navy SEAL tridents, and the Guardian Angel's insignia, a winged helmet superimposed over a shield, a symbol of watchful, protective strength. The bikes themselves were massive, impeccably maintained machines. Their deep-throated rumble a unified, purposeful drone of power that commanded respect, not fear. At their head was a man on a massive custom Harley-Davidson Road King, its paint a deep, patriotic blue with elegant silver pinstriping. He was broad-shouldered and straight-backed, dismounting with the easy, powerful grace of a lifelong rider and a man who had never let his fitness lapse. His hair was a shock of white, his skin tanned and leathery from decades under the sun, but his eyes, as he removed his sunglasses, were a piercing, intelligent blue, missing nothing. Frankie, the Rock Rossetti, now 72 years old and looking like he could still lead a squad through hell, had arrived. He strode toward the diner, his men flowing out behind him with a quiet, efficient purpose. Without a single shouted command, they fanned out, establishing a secure perimeter around the town square, the diner, and Art's home. Some took up visible posts, their crossed arms and watchful eyes a clear message. Others moved in pairs, speaking calmly with shop owners and nervous residents, their demeanors reassuring and professional. They were not occupiers. They were a highly organized security detail securing a civilian asset. Rossetti pushed the door open, the bell jingling its familiar, now incongruous tune. He walked over, his boots echoing a firm, confident rhythm on the linoleum. To the astonishment of Maria and the now growing crowd of townspeople watching from a respectful distance, the formidable, legendary leader of the Guardian Angels stopped before the old man in the booth. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he straightened his spine, pulled his shoulders back, and stood at a posture of rigid, formal attention, his eyes fixed on a point just above Art's head. It was a gesture of profound respect that transcended the decades. "Chief Callahan," Rossetti said, his voice thick with an emotion that threatened to break through his iron composure. "Sergeant Francis Rossetti, reporting for duty, sir." Art slowly, carefully, got to his feet. A faint, warm smile touched the corners of his lips and crinkled the edges of his eyes. He reached out and put a hand on Frankie's shoulder. "At ease, Frankie. For God's sake, at ease. It's good to see you. I just wish it was under better circumstances." The formality broke. Rossetti's stern expression softened, and he pulled Art into a brief, powerful bear hug, clapping him on the back with a force that would have staggered a lesser man. "Damn, it's good to see you, Art. I thought I'd never get that call." He held Art at arm's length, his eyes scanning the older man's face with a medic's intensity. "Are you sure you're all right? Did they touch you? I want a full debrief." "I'm fine, Frankie. A little bruised pride is all. But they threatened the town. They threatened Maria here. They threatened everything this place stands for." Rossetti's expression hardened back into that of a commander as he turned to include Sheriff Miller, who had approached. "Tell me everything, Chief. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." As Art recounted the confrontation in his calm, measured way, more angels filtered into the diner, their presence filling the space with a quiet, potent energy. These men, veterans of wars spanning half a century, listened intently. Their faces, already grim, darkened with a cold, controlled professional anger. They understood the concept of honor, of community, of defending the home front. They had seen true evil, true courage, and true sacrifice. The petty, parasitic tyranny of the Iron Jackals was an insult to everything they had fought for, everything their fallen brothers had died for. The Iron Jackals, one of the angels, a massive man with a master sergeant's bearing and a flat-top haircut named Gunny, growled. His voice was like gravel in a drum. They've been a buzzing fly up and down the state. Small-time thugs with big-time egos. No discipline, no code. Time to swat that fly. Rossetti held up a hand. Patience, Gunny. The chief here taught me something in the skies over Vietnam, when the world was a green blur and death was a constant companion, he said, his voice carrying to every man in the room with natural, unquestioned authority. He never raised his voice. He never panicked. He was calm. He was focused. He assessed the situation, he made a decision, and he executed. That's what we'll do now. We won't be like them. We'll be calm. We'll be focused. And we will lead these lost boys directly to the consequences of their actions. He turned to Art and the sheriff. They'll be back. A man like Jax, his pride is a fragile, ugly thing. He can't let this stand. He'll try to save face with a show of force. Let him come, Gunny said, his fists clenching and unclenching. First, Rossetti said, his mind already working through tactics and logistics with the speed of long practice. We secure the area and fortify the population. Art, you're not staying here alone tonight. You're with me, Maria. He turned to the diner owner. You and anyone else in town who feels threatened will provide a visible presence. This diner, the homes of the elderly, the school, they are now under the protection of the guardian angels. This town is a friendly asset, and we will defend it. But our defense will be smart. The transformation of Sierra Bluffs over the next 48 hours was breathtaking. The guardian angels didn't just stand guard. They integrated. They became a quiet, reassuring, and highly effective part of the town's fabric. Teams of angels, directed by quiet hand signals and a few terse words, maintained a visible but non-threatening patrol. They helped elderly residents carry their groceries. They directed traffic with an efficiency that was more intimidating than any show of force. They drank coffee at Rosie's, their quiet conversations and respectful demeanor a stark contrast to the Jackals' boorishness. The people of Sierra Bluffs, initially terrified, now walked with their shoulders back, a newfound pride and sense of security swelling in their chests. The fear was replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty toward both Art and his unexpected allies. Meanwhile, at the Jackals' hideout, a run-down, grease-stained auto body shop on the desolate edge of town, surrounded by the skeletons of cars and piles of scrap metal, chaos and paranoia reigned. "The Guardian Angels!" Jax roared, hurling a half-full beer bottle against the corrugated tin wall. It exploded in a shower of brown glass and foam. He called in the goddamn Guardian Angels. How was I supposed to know some senile old fart was connected to Frankie Rossetti? How? Vance was pacing nervously, running a hand over his serpent tattoo as if to soothe it. Jax, we can't fight them. It's not a fight. It's a suicide mission. They're not a gang. They're a damn private army. They have lawyers, they have cops, they have guys who can call in airstrikes for all I know. We have pool cues, bad attitudes, and a meth habit. We need to cut our losses, get on the bikes, and get the hell out of this state. Tonight. No! Jack screamed, his pride wounded beyond all reason. Spittle flew from his lips. This is our town. We don't run. That old man humiliated me in front of everyone. He made me look weak in front of my own crew. He needs to pay. If we back down now, we're finished. Our reputation will be garbage. Everyone from here to El Paso will know the Jackals got scared off by a bunch of geriatric weekend warriors. An older member, a grizzled, weary man named Diesel, who had been in and out of trouble since the 70s and had seen his share of real hard cases, shook his head slowly, his expression one of profound pity. Jax, kid, listen to me. This isn't about being weak. This is about being smart. You don't understand what you've done. We didn't pick a fight with a rival club. We kicked a hornet's nest that's connected to the whole damn power grid. We don't stand there and argue with the hornets. We run. We run fast, and we run far, and we never look back. I'm not running. Jax's eyes were wild, unfocused, blazing with a toxic mix of fear and rage. The plan formed in his rage-addled mind, a plan of spectacular, self-destructive folly. We hit them where it hurts. We show them that we're not afraid. We hit their symbol. We burn the old man's house to the ground. We torch the diner. We show them that the Jackals bite back. We do it tonight, when they think they've won. Back in Sierra Bluffs, a final council of war was being held at Rosie's Diner, which had been transformed into a highly efficient command post. Maps were spread, radios were charged, and the air was thick with focused intensity. Art Frank, my deputies are in position, Sheriff Miller said, his face grim. But this is a powder keg. Jax is unstable. He's going to do something stupid and violent. He's going to lash out. Then we'll be ready for him, Rossetti stated calmly. He pointed to a detailed map of the town. We'll treat this like a tactical ambush. We have the advantage. We know the terrain, we have the discipline, and we have the law on our side. Our job is to protect the citizens and ensure these men are taken into custody using the minimum necessary force. Their job is to lash out blindly. We will let them make the mistakes. We will channel their aggression into our trap. Art had been quiet, studying the map with the eye of a pilot memorizing a landing zone. His finger, crooked with arthritis, traced the lines of the streets and alleys around his own home. They'll go for symbols, he said quietly, his voice thoughtful. They won't understand strategy, only spectacle. They'll target what they think represents our strength, our history. My house, the VFW hall. They're the obvious targets. Rossetti nodded. Then we fortify those positions, but not overtly. We want them to commit. We want to draw them in. Gunny, the cameras are in place? Affirmative, Rock, Gunny replied. Small wireless units on the Callahan residence and the VFW, feeding directly to our monitors and the sheriff's tablet. We'll have crystal clear footage of their faces. When they make their move, we'll have them on felony charges, arson, attempted murder, breaking and entering. The law will be the hammer. We're just the anvil they're about to run into. The plan was set. As darkness fell, a deep, expectant silence descended over Sierra Bluffs. The town was a stage, and the players were in position. The release came just after 2:00 a.m. under a cloak of moonless, inky blackness. It started with a pathetic, almost comedic act of arson. A Molotov cocktail, a bottle of gasoline with a rag wick, sailed through the front window of the VFW hall. But the Angels, anticipating this, had replaced the flammable contents with water. It landed with a harmless splash and a tinkle of glass, the rag fizzling out on the wet floor. Another was thrown at the side of Rosie's Diner. but an angel stationed on the adjacent roof, invisible in the shadows, simply stood up and stamped out the burning rag before it could do any damage. The acts were desperate, amateurish, the flailings of a defeated enemy. Then the report crackled over the secure radio network. Eagle Eye to Rock, confirmed. Multiple hostiles, estimate 10 to 12 on foot, approaching the Callahan residence from the eastern alley. They're armed with crowbars. One has a gas can. They're prying open the back door. The bait is taken. I repeat, the bait is taken. Art was at the command post in the diner, watching the grainy black and white feed on a monitor. His face was grim, but his hands were steady on his knees. They were defiling his home, the house he had built with Eleanor, filled with a lifetime of memories. His late wife's garden, his children's drawings still tucked in a drawer. But it was a necessary sacrifice to save the soul of the town itself. They've taken the bait, he confirmed, his voice flat and resolved. Rossetti keyed his radio. His voice was calm, ice cold, the voice of a man who had done this 100 times before in very different jungles. All units, converge on the Callahan residence. Execute Plan Hammer. Non-lethal force only. I repeat, non-lethal only. We take them alive and unharmed for the sheriff. Move in, now. The Jackals, led by a frenzied, reckless Jax, were so single-mindedly focused on their act of petty vengeance, so intent on destroying the symbol of the old man's defiance, that they failed to notice the silent, professional convergence happening around them. From every direction, from darkened side streets, from behind neighboring houses, from the shadows of parked cars, the guardian angels emerged. They didn't roar in on their bikes. They moved on foot, silently, like ghosts, their dark clothing making them one with the night. They didn't yell or scream threats. They simply formed an impenetrable, silent wall of men, 3 deep, completely surrounding the property, blocking every possible escape route with a quiet, absolute finality. Jack stood inside Art's porch, a crowbar in one hand and the gas can in the other, poised to smash and burn. He turned, sensing the change in the atmosphere, the sudden, immense pressure of dozens of silent gazes fixed upon him. He looked out the broken door at the sea of grim-faced, cross-armed veterans, their faces illuminated by the faint, eerie glow of the distant security light. They were utterly still, utterly silent. There were no weapons visibly brandished, no shouts, no challenges. Just a wall of silent, absolute, and terrifying judgment. For the first time, the true, catastrophic, and hopeless scale of his mistake crashed down upon him with the weight of a mountain. This wasn't a fight he could win with intimidation or violence. He was facing a brotherhood, a code, a history, a resolve that he could never comprehend, let alone defeat. The crowbar and the gas can felt suddenly absurd, the pathetic toys of a child throwing a tantrum in a room full of adults. Sheriff Miller and his deputies, who had been waiting with engines off a block away, now moved in. Suddenly, bright floodlights mounted on the sheriff's SUV snapped on, bathing the scene in a harsh, unforgiving white light, freezing the Jackals in place like startled deer. The deputies moved through the silent ring of angels, who parted effortlessly to let them pass, their discipline a stark contrast to the Jackals' panic. "Jax! Vance! Down on the ground! Now! You're all under arrest! Do it now!" The sheriff's voice boomed, amplified and authoritative through the bullhorn. There was no resistance. The fight had gone out of them completely, drained away by the terrifying, silent discipline of the angels and the finality of the law. The Jackals dropped their tools, the gas can clattering to the wooden porch, and meekly, almost gratefully, submitted to being handcuffed. Jax was the last, his hands shaking so violently the deputy had to guide them. He was led away, his head bowed, not making eye contact with anyone, his spirit not just broken, but utterly crushed, hollowed out. He wasn't just going to jail. He was becoming a cautionary tale, a punchline in the story of a town that fought back. In the weeks and months that followed, Sierra Bluffs began to heal, its spirit not just restored, but fortified, tempered in the fire of the conflict. The guardian angels stayed for a time, helping to repair the broken window at the VFW and the damage to Art's porch, repainting the scorched siding with a fresh coat of whitewash, ensuring the last, scattered, leaderless remnants of the Jackals were routed from the county. But their greatest impact was the lesson they left behind, a lesson in the power of community, the strength of silence over noise, and the profound respect earned by a life of service and integrity. Art Callahan, the quiet old man on the porch, became a revered symbol of the town's resilience, its quiet, unassuming, but unyielding heart. The story of the veteran pilot who called in a different kind of air cavalry spread through the state, a modern-day legend told in VFW halls and roadside diners. The legal process moved swiftly, facing overwhelming evidence, the high-definition video, the testimony of the entire town, the recovered tools and gas can. Most of the Jackals took plea deals, receiving sentences that would keep them away from Sierra Bluffs for years. Jax, facing a long list of felonies including attempted arson and assault, was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, a stark and lonely end for a man who lived for the approval of a crowd. But the story, true to its deeper themes, did not end with mere punishment. In a move that stunned everyone and spoke volumes about his character, Art, with the fervent support of the town council and the blessing of the guardian angels, made a remarkable offer to the younger Jackals, the ones like Vance who had followed out of a misplaced need for belonging, for a family, rather than innate malice. They could face the full, unforgiving extent of the law, or they could choose a different path. They could stay in Sierra Bluffs under a strict, court-approved probationary program. They would work, under supervision, to rebuild and repair what they had helped to destroy. They would work with their hands, learning a trade from the local carpenters and mechanics, contributing to the community they had terrorized. They would be assigned mentors from the guardian angels, not as jailers but as guides, men who could teach them about a different kind of brotherhood, one built on respect, not fear. A few of the young men, humbled, desperate for a second chance, and seeing the stark emptiness of their old lives, chose to stay. One evening, as the desert air began to cool and the sky turned into a breathtaking canopy of countless stars, Art sat on his freshly repaired porch with Frankie Rossetti. The rhythmic creak of the rocker was a familiar comfort. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant, lonesome cry of a coyote, sounds that once again spoke of peace, not peril. "You know, Chief," Frankie said, sipping a glass of sweet iced tea, "for 50 years, I carried that promise. I waited for that call. I always wondered what kind of trouble could be big enough, bad enough, for you to finally need my help. I pictured corporate land grabs, corrupt officials. I never pictured a pack of idiot kids on motorcycles with more attitude than sense." Art smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his eyes as he looked out at the quiet, sleeping town. The lights in the windows were warm and steady, and the streets were safe. It wasn't the scale of the trouble, Frankie. It was the principle. They weren't just threatening me. They were spitting on the peace, on the memory of everyone who ever fought for this quiet. For the right to sit on your own porch and hear nothing but the wind. Some things, some principles, are worth fighting for, even at 78. Even if the enemy isn't a Viet Cong division, but a bunch of lost boys with crowbars. "The boys," Frankie said, gesturing with his glass toward a group of angels chatting quietly by their bikes, preparing to ride out at first light. "They'd follow you anywhere, you know. They've heard the stories now. They know what you did, not just for me, but for all of them, by defending what this flag stands for." He nodded toward the small American flag fluttering by Art's door, catching the gentle night breeze. "I didn't do anything any other man in my position wouldn't have done," Art said softly, his gaze drifting upward to the constellations he once used for celestial navigation, long before GPS. "That's where you're wrong, Captain. That's where you're always wrong," Frankie replied, his voice firm with a conviction born of shared experience. "It's the choice. In the air, on the ground, here on this porch, you always choose to stand up. You choose to do the right thing, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. That's the lesson. That's what we all remember. That's what we all came for. It wasn't to fight a gang. It was to stand with you. To repay a debt, sure. But more than that, to reaffirm that the code still matters." As the two old friends sat in a comfortable, familiar silence, the town of Sierra Bluffs slept more peacefully than it had in years. Its streets safe. Its spirit not just restored, but stronger and more united than ever. The war was over, and the quiet pilot, who had once fought in the humid, jagged skies of Vietnam, had won his final, most important mission on the sun-baked, sacred soil of home. The phone call had been made. The brothers had answered, not with a mindless roar of vengeance, but with the disciplined, resonant thunder of honor. And the soul of a town had been saved, not by vengeance, but by the unbreakable, timeless bonds of courage, memory, and respect. In the quiet streets of Sierra Bluffs, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. But the town would never forget the day true strength revealed itself, not in loud threats, but in quiet resolve and unbreakable bonds. Now we turn to you. Was the veteran's code of honor the right answer to the Jackals' chaos? Or does true strength sometimes require leaving no room for second chances? Where do you stand? Should every person, no matter their mistakes, be offered a path to redemption? Or are some lines, once crossed, unforgivable? This debate continues in the comments. Share your verdict. If this story of quiet courage and brotherhood resonated with you, continue the mission. Hit like, subscribe to the What Happened Then stories, and share it with someone who understands that real strength needs no announcement. Your next story of hidden heroes awaits.